So today we are going to talk about meter, and what is meter but another word for measuring, and measuring, what are we measuring? We're measuring time. And this is, again, a continuation of the last video of our discussions of musical time, rhythm, how we organize time in music. So when it comes to meter, meter is those groups that we mentioned in the last video. So the grouping into four that we heard in the techno song, the 1, 2, 3, 4, that quick 130 approximate BPM in the Charlotte DeVitta video, those notes were grouped into groups of 4. Just in the Bach, they were grouped into groups of 8. These are metrical organizations. These groupings are patterns of emphasis. So when I was counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, the emphasis is on the 1. So that's how you get a grouping, is by a consistent emphasis on the time. So remember that metaphor of the flowing stream of rhythmos. Those downbeats, or the emphasized beats, beat 1, beat 3 a little bit, 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are the rocks that the river flows over every time. It's always the same, but never in the same way. Okay, good. Let's also start today with a video. Now, I want you to think back to the last video. You were able to count with the Charlotte DeVitta one, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And now try counting with this.
Давай.
Okay, try listening for the downbeats here. Are you counting? 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Okay, so I hope you were able to get some of those downbeats, right? And get the feeling of the beat. Listen to the piece and try to find where the beat lands. Where is the main point of emphasis that is the same each time, that recurs each time it comes around? So, bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. So you're hearing on my snaps, that's where that emphasis point is, right? 1 da 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 da. And then when it goes bum ba da da, bum ba da 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 da, bum 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 bum. Okay, so it's a lot slower than the video we watched yesterday. But you can still hear that there's this regular 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, right? Yes, but now, how can you count in between those? How can you subdivide this? So this is going to introduce us to a couple of new things in the topic of meter. And so let's just kind of pick up where we left off from last time. Here, by the way, is the score to the piece we just listened to. The piece is by Evgeny Grinko, and he's a modern pianist and composer. This is a score not by him. This is a score that someone else made for free. I think I found it on Muse Score. So once again, there's a link in the Gaucho space. Go check out Muse Score. People are publicly sourcing music, so they'll just listen to a piece, they'll write it down, then you can go find it on Muse Score for free. So that's very nice, and we'll come back to this at the end and explain this score, explain what we heard and how this score reflects what we heard. Okay, let's pick up right where we left off last time with the rhythm tree. So you can see that here we have, that whole note at the top divides into 2, divides into 2, divides into 2, divides into 2. So each time we're dividing by 2 as we go down the rhythm tree. Let's perform this quick, because we didn't try this in the last video. So try this with me. Ready? 4 for nothing, and then we'll go in and start on the whole note with ta. Ta, 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 ta. Now see if you can switch between quarter notes and 16th notes. See if you can go quarter note, 8th note, 16th note, 8th note. Let's try that. 1. Ta 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 ta. Okay, so that was quarter note, 8th note, quarter note, 8th, 8th, 16th, 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 8th, 8th. Ta 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 ta. Okay, so these are kind of giving you ideas of how to arrange a measure which has 4 quarter notes, and you can have different note values in there, but it has to be a complete measure of 4/4. Well, what do I mean? What's a measure? We haven't even covered this, so you already might know this. This is probably a review, but measures in music are slices of that musical time. This is what creates the rhythm. This is how measures recur, and the meter is spelled out over the whole piece via measures. Again, meter and measure just mean the same thing. The measures are separated by, also called bars, are separated by bar lines, as you can see there in the score. And the bar line is just a vertical line through the staff, tells you where the measure begins and ends. Very simple way of organizing. And we count the measures there. You can see 1, 2, and 3. A double bar line will indicate the end of a section or the end of the piece. So you'll have a thick double bar line there to show we're done. And then there's another variant of that, which is the repeat sign, which is kind of like a double bar line, but with 2 dots. And this indicates go back either to the beginning of the piece, or just repeat that section, which then you'll have it indicated by a forward-facing repeat sign. So this one would be ta 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 ta, and each time it'll just jump back here, back around to here. So you can have, each time it'll just loop back on itself like that. That's what the repeat sign indicates. Again, with this term meter, we've seen this before. We've seen this big grouping of 4. In the Charlotte Tavita piece, we just counted it out in the rhythm tree. This is what the rhythm tree the standard rhythm tree is presented as this 4/4 grouping, because this is, as I said before, by far the most common metrical organization we have. And so there's a couple of things to talk about here. What is this? What are these symbols? How can we understand these more consistently? Read these in when there are different meters. Understand how they correspond to a different meter. So the first one here, 4/4, and the little C that you see down there in the score, both highlighted in yellow, they mean the same thing. For a big grouping, a meter that consists of 4 quarter notes per measure. And the C just stands for common time, which, as I say again, it is the most common metrical grouping we have. So when I say 4/4 time, or common time, or 4/4 meter, or something like this, I'm referring to that 4/4, or that common time refers to a time signature. And time signature is crucial for understanding musical scores, because they're right there at the beginning, and they tell you what the flow of time, what the meter is for that piece. And the time signature, how to read it, it answers for you 2 questions. And the first question is, how many beats go in a measure? So we've seen 4. You can also have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Any number of beats can be in a measure. You could have 5 beats in a measure and just have a repeating emphasis point after every 5 beats. That will make yourself a measure. And then the second number below it, what does that say? Well, that's going to tell you which note value, like what we learned in the last video, which of those, is it 16th, is it 8th, is it quarter, is it, which note value gets the beat. So we've heard that pulse, we've heard that beat, but it's not already determined. Is that it could be a 16th notes, it could be a half notes pulsing. So the pulse is not already a quarter note or a 8th note or a half note or something. The pulse can be any of those, And we can write music relative to that pulse at any tempo and with any kind of notation. But we have to decide based on the time signature which note gets the beat. So the top number, just to review, the top number is how many beats are in the measure, and the bottom number is what note value gets that beat. And then, so here are some more examples, right? We can have like 4/4, which we've seen. So the way to read this as a fraction is like 4 above 4. So how many beats per measure? 4. Second question, what note gets the beat? 4 means quarter. 4 means quarter, right? It could be a 2, that would mean a half note, or a 1 would be a whole note. 8 would be eighth notes. So we can answer this question. So there are going to be, in this piece, there are going to be 4 quarter notes per measure, per that time signature there. So that's going to be that 4 quarter notes per measure. The second one, 3/4. So it answers this question first. How many beats per measure? 3. What note gets the beat? The 4, the quarters. So we can read that 3 quarter notes per measure. And we'll see some examples of 3/4. And then lastly, we have here another one that's kind of a more new, right? What about this? We could have the first question being, how many beats per measure? Well, now there's only going to be 2. What note gets the beat? The 8th note. So we're going to have 2 eighths per measure, and you can see that written there. Okay. So as I said, in each measure, the first beat of the measure is going to get a point of emphasis. It's going to be the downbeat. It's going to be the strongest beat of that measure, and it's going to recur at the first beat of each measure. And so it's always conducted with a downward motion. And it's a little bit difficult to teach conducting over the Zoom or whatever, but you know, if you look, you'll come down with your hand on the downbeat. So 1, and then come in 2, and then come out 3, and then come up 4. See that? So down, in, out, up, down, in, out, up, down, in, out, up, and then you're conducting in 4/4. But there's that downbeat, that first one, boom, that initial downbeat. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you start to get the sense of that. Practice that. Practice maybe conducting down, in, out, up, and singing along 1, 2, 3, 4, or counting along rather. So try that. Good. And then what do we call these other beats? So there's also upbeats. So the upbeat is going to be the one that's relatively weak compared to the downbeat. And in 4/4, these are really 2 and 4. 3 is also kind of like its own stronger beat. So if you get the sense of this, like the first beat is always the strongest. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And there's a little bit more weight on 3 than 2 and 4. Say, for example, we're in 2/4. Split this measure in half. Then every other note is going to be the downbeat. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So that would be 2/4. Now in 4/4, it's kind of similar, but it smooths out that pattern a little bit more. So it's not so much like 2/4. It's a 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. But in 4/4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And this is, of course, going to depend on the piece, but generally, if you're writing in 4/4, you're going after that emphasis pattern. Let's listen. We should listen to a couple of pieces. You should listen to a couple of pieces and see if you can count that measure with them. Now, we've also seen some other time signatures now, like 3/4, 3 beats per measure. What note gets the beat? The quarter note, 4. So 3/4 means just that, 3 quarter notes per measure. And in this case, we're going to have the downbeat at the first beat, just like in 4/4, 1. But now we're only going to have 2 other beats, and they're both upbeats. So this goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now count that with the piece I played at the beginning. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, etc. It's a little bit challenging to play while you're counting out loud like that, but you get the idea. So that piece, the bass line, if you can see on the keyboard, yeah? So the bass line, chunk, 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 chunk. That's not the correct bass line, but you got the idea that chunk, chunk, down, up, up. So you can have that chunk, chunk. Now think back to the Evgeny Grinko. Okay, do you feel this piece? Do you feel this piece that we heard was in 4/4 or 3/4? That, remember that piece that goes. Now look at my left hand. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. Okay, so this is also kind of like a waltz. In fact, the piece is called Valse. So you might be familiar with the dance style of a waltz, and that is kind of one of the basic ideas of the 3/4. So this piece I was playing is Chopin. And in this case, it's not actually a waltz, although he wrote many beautiful waltzes. This is a mazurka, and the mazur is a Polish waltz variant. It's a little bit faster usually, and it's kind of, it's just a Polish variant on the waltz. So that's the Chopin piece, and the Evgeny Grinko piece is like a more modern kind of waltz. Okay, so good. Now we have a kind of sense of 4/4 versus 3/4 and the emphasis patterns in them. Let's keep going. The last thing to discuss with regard to the beats are the offbeats. And so these are, just like in the Charlotte Tevita that we saw last time, the hi-hats or the ands of each beat. So in 4/4, this looks like this: 1 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And you should practice counting like this too. And then in 3/4, this is going to be very similar. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3, and that's the offbeat. So we've got downbeats, stronger. We've got upbeats, a little bit weaker, and we've got offbeats, even weaker. But each one of these, when I say strong and weak, I just mean emphasis wise. So, of course, each one has a very important role to play. And when you start to play with this grid and not just let it be like a ta 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 ta, when you start to have different variations in the rhythm, you start to break free from the grid, keeping the grid in the background but having it looser. And you can, for example, ignore a strong beat, it creates a sense of tension, and then go into the other beats. So let me try to give you examples like 1, 2, 3, 4, and 2, 3, 4, and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So see how I kind of sang less and less until I was just singing the ands, and you can create kind of fun patterns this way. Okay, so that's the essence of the beat. Just a little bit more to review before we can get back to the Evgeny Grinko score and finish up for today's video. Last time we talked about the dot and how it extends the value of a note by 50%, kind of gives it 1.5 times its original length. So here's just a little bit more examples of the dot in action. So here's a measure of 4/4, right? And then with dots, this next measure is going to add an eighth note to that quarter note and push that other eighth note over. So instead of, now we have, so here how you have the long, short, long, short, long, but it's in the same amount of time. If I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. So you can hear how that's working there. And there's a couple more examples here. Like this second line goes ta 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 ta. Okay, that's just with the eighth notes there. And then this variant goes ta 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 ta. All right. So you can see how that first one becomes from ta ta even to like long short 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 long. Okay. Then the third line ta 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 becomes ta 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 ta. And the fourth line, ta 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 ta, becomes ta 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 ta. So I hope you can get a sense of how the dot moves the second note over and extends the first note by the same amount, by an eighth note, right? Or by any value, really. It depends on what the dot is attached to. Okay, one more example of dots. Here's a one where instead of dots, there are rests in the lower example. So you can see exactly how much the dot is adding to that. So here the dot is on a half note, so it adds a quarter note to itself. And you can see that with the quarter note rest. Here the dot is on a quarter note, so it's adding an eighth note, and here you can see that with the eighth note rest. And here the dot is on an eighth note, and it's adding a 16th note. So you can see that with the 16th note rest down there. Now these are going to sound almost the same, right? The first line, ta, 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 ta. And the second line just has a little bit more space. Ta, 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 ta. So almost the same, but instead of extending those notes through, we rest and we introduce a little bit of silence there. And then 2 more music notation details that are important for understanding this next score. So the slur is an arch that connects 2 notes that are different notes. And what this does is it just allows composers to show, I want this group of notes to sound phrased together, like to sound like one phrase, which is, what is a phrase? But just an idea. Like here in the top line, instead of just having these as four separate notes, bum, 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 bum. I mean, it's kind of boring, but this composer wants, okay, so it's a very subtle difference, but you hear how the 2 notes in the middle are connected, and then the outer notes are connected. So actually, I shouldn't even change the rhythm. Okay, so that's even 1, 2, 3, 4, but they're sort of subtly connected together. Same with that bottom example. Instead of, where they're all evenly spaced and whatever, this slur connects them and smooths it over. It makes it more legato or smoother. And maybe you want to make a little bit of separation when the phrase ends. So you kind of have a very subtle thing there, but slurs are important, and it's important to not make a mistake of confusing a slur with what's called a tie. And a tie is kind of like a dot, because a tie connects 2 short durations of the same note and makes them into one long note. Okay, so here you have a half note tied to a quarter note. So that's going to be worth, a half note's worth 2 beats, quarter note's worth 1 beat. The total is going to be worth 3 beats, just like if you had a dotted half note. So this example here is making a dotted half note, but extending it over the bar line. And this example here is making a dotted whole note, but extending it out over the whole, over more than 1 bar, because the whole note already takes up a whole bar. So this is just going to be one really long note. And you can use a tie to connect as many of the same note together as you want. If you connect different notes together with a tie, though, it'll look like a slur, and it won't actually connect them, right? Because how can you sustain different notes? So what it is the tie will connect the same note into one long note. Okay, now we can finally return to our score and look a little bit more in detail on what we're seeing here. So in the bottom line, I want you to look at the left hand, which is in the bottom there. I'll draw here. So we're looking at this staff right here, the left hand, and notice how it's going chunk, 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 chunk. You can see it on the page, right? Down beat here, down beat here, and then up immediately follows that. Up, down, down, up. And you can remember, we hear this in the piece. Oops. So you get the idea. Yeah, you remember this piece from the beginning, and that chunk, 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 that waltz pattern is always there in the left hand, even when it changes chord. The melody is a little bit more free, is a little bit more loose, right? It has dots, it has ties. Look at this. So there's a rest. Rest. Oops. Rest. So at the very beginning of the melody starts with silence. And then a long note that is tied. So it's a half note tied to an eighth note. Gets you a little bit longer of a note there. And then those dotted quarter notes make a little bit more variation because they'll actually land on different times than the left hand. So hear how that note comes in between these notes. Anyways, the tie and the slur, actually we don't see any slurs in this example, but the ties are being used here to vary the melody above the nice evenly waltzing chunk chunk bass, which is in a 3/4 meter.